afternoon we are visiting Le Mayeur Museum. His name is Adrien Jean Le Mayeur, is a Belgian painter, and there's exhibits of his work in here also, which I believe is slightly deteriorating through age, but the gardens are quite extensive. A fairly good property to have back in the day. It was about 1932. And that is the gate going in. And in relation to its whereabouts on the beach, we have the highest hotel in Sanur, and behind that, just over there, is the new International Hospital. And this is how far from the beach the house is. That's the gates, and the house is just behind that wall. So I'd assume that that wall is a later feature, and you would have had open access to the beach and all the views. And right up this away is Sanur Harbour. And on a good day he would have had a pretty good view of Mount Agung. Just see the tips over there. And inside is this very condensed story of the life and times of Adrien Jean Le Mayeur de Meupré. Born in Brussels in 1880, originally studied architecture and civil engineering. However, he was passionate about painting and left to travel across Europe, Northern Africa, through India, down through Southeast Asia, actually heading towards Tahiti, where Paul Gauguin had made his fame as an impressionist painter. However, once arriving in Tahiti, he was disappointed with the state of the place and decided to come back to Southeast Asia, and finally settling in Bali, landing in the north of Bali in 1932 and making his way to his final destination in Sanur that year. The first large building that you encounter opposite the pavilion is probably the museum, but there's not a great deal in here, more in the house actually, but we'll get to that later. This doorway is very narrow and not too high either, so it's a bit of a tight squeeze. Yeah, that's the pavilion through the window there that he used to entertain and also to receive customers for his paintings. This was actually the living area, and it was possibly all open. There is some sort of glass, I think there's glass over the windows now, but it would have been open, I suspect, in its day. Now, I could be wrong about the glass being a later addition from when it was actually first built, and I think that is contributing to holding a lot of heat in this building. It's very hot, warm at the least, but you can hear the fan in the background, but that's doing absolutely nothing really than blowing warm air around. But if it was open, I think you'd get the breeze right through and it would be quite good. So yeah, I guess the glass is there for protection. I'm not sure. I'd have to say that he was probably quite a small person by the size of these doors. They are not very high or wide. And there's collections of more of the artwork through here. I think some of this has been described as somewhat post-impressionist. So putting that in a timeline perspective, the Impressionist movement started closer to about 100 years earlier with famous painters that you'd probably know: Manet, Monet, Van Gogh, Toulouse-Lautrec and the likes. So after a year in Bali in 1933, he travelled to Singapore with some of his works and was able to sell them there, and from the profits of that came back to Sanur to buy this property, or buy this land and build the property, deciding that his travelling days were over and Bali was where he was going to spend the rest of his days. As a point of interest, some of Le Mayeur's works from private collections have been sold through Sotheby's and also Christie's, and one in particular, Women Around the Lotus Pond, had an asking price of over $1 million US. Careful with these pointy bits there, a little bit dangerous on your head on these narrow doors. And most of these paintings of topless girls are of Nepalog model, girlfriend and later wife. He met her when she was 15 in Denpasar. She was a Legong dancer and he was intrigued by her. Scandal in our day, but back then in Bali, anything goes. And they got married after she turned 18 and she became his lifelong model. We're now moving into the studio and dining room, multi-purpose room, and those mattresses on the recliners there, I would suspect they're for modelling purposes, but I hope they're not the authentic mattresses. They don't look all that comfortable. This is the actual boudoir bedroom. It's quite small, one of the smallest rooms in the house. The other room I was just in was used as a dining room and a studio. But this one is relatively small. Le Mayeur had to go back to Belgium for medical purposes and left his wife Nee here. And she stayed on and passed away at the age of 65.
68.
68, Mark tells me, my historian. And that is an outside view of the studio, which has got those beds in it, maybe for reclining models. I'm not sure. So that was the room we just came out of, the studio. So it was a fair-sized house, but incredibly hot inside. They have installed fans for us travelling through, but they don't seem to make a great deal of difference. So he would have been loving it if air conditioning had been invented in those days. To say if this pond was actually there in the day. And I could assume this might have been a well many years ago, and they would have probably hand hoisted water up from there. You could imagine these trees being here as well. They look quite old, and that's looking into the back of the bedroom area. Around the windows, the ornate woodwork, carving, wood carved. And you can see on the outside of the building here, which is the bedroom was in that part, and the studio's in here, there's these reliefs in the wall. To make it a little bit more decorative, personalised touch, I suppose. There is this two-storey building right next to it. This is a modern home for the caretakers, or I'm not sure. I don't want to make things up, but it does look a little bit more modern than this original building, which is here. Part of the garden area. Lots of big grey clouds coming.